Hello and welcome back to the Karma Stories podcast. I'm Rob and I hope you are having a wonderful day today. Today I have a single story for you with an update that you are not going to want to miss, because I think by the end of this one, you're going to be really upset with somebody in the story. The Karma Stories podcast is published to all major podcasting platforms, and you can also read along on YouTube under our @Karma Stories podcast handle. If you have a story you'd like to submit to the podcast, you can do so by email at karmastoriespod@gmail.com. Alright, on to our story with update. Let's jump right in. This story comes to us from Vittoria Vici. I, 24 female, was just uninvited from a wedding that had already started. Am I overreacting? Today, my 24 male partner and I, let's call him Eric, were invited to the wedding of one of his oldest friends from school. We received our save the date months ago, and the invite was addressed to Eric and Vicky. Our invite stated we were invited for the whole shebang: the service, the breakfast, and the evening reception. Our RSVP required both of our dietary requirements for the breakfast, which we replied to ages ago. I thought this was pretty awesome and generous of the bride and groom, as I had never met either of them, and Eric was only close with the bride, so it was a very nice gesture. The wedding is a few hours away from where we live, and since neither of us drive, I booked train tickets in advance, which came to about £60 each return, and an Airbnb, which worked out at £90 between us. We don't earn a lot, so this is quite a big spend to justify. However, since they had invited us to the whole wedding, we thought it would be rude not to go. The bride also specified colors we should wear, so I bought a new outfit since I didn't have anything formal that would be suitable. Not the end of the world, but with Christmas coming up, it was a bit difficult, and I had to be really frugal all through November to make it work. Total spend was probably double what I would spend monthly on fun stuff like going out for dinner or drinks or new clothes. We got to the service and it was beautiful. The bride looked lovely, and it was very emotional. I get nervous at weddings, couldn't say why, and so I hadn't eaten beforehand, figuring the 4-course breakfast would fill me up nicely. After the ceremony, we went straight into the venue to have drinks and sit down at tables. We were towards the back of the line into the venue, and so half the congregation had already sat down. We glanced at the seating plan, saw Eric's name, and headed over. There was no place setting for me. Eric found his name, but there weren't any free seats at the table. Eric sat down, and I asked an usher whether there was a mistake. He didn't know, so he waved over the bride. She and I had never met before, but she seemed friendly, until she opened her mouth. "Oh, no, you're not part of the breakfast. The invitation was just for the reception and service. You're welcome to come back later." This was in front of most of the guests who had already sat down, in a big venue, probably 140-ish seats. The usher suggested I go to the pub. Eric didn't know what to do, but didn't want to cause a scene, so he stayed put and quiet. I quite literally have never felt so embarrassed and humiliated in my life. I left and it was raining heavily. Hadn't brought an umbrella since it was an indoor wedding. And, being in a rural place, I had to walk about 20 minutes to get anywhere else. The usher had suggested a pub where the other guests are, so I just kept walking, but my shoes were literally ruined and soaked through, as well as being pretty darn cold because it's December and I was dressed for a wedding. Get to the pub to find a handful of merrymakers drinking heavily at 2 p.m. in wedding clothes. Introduced myself kind of awkwardly as they were total strangers, and they were luckily really nice. They invited me to sit with them and tell them about the service. All of them had only been invited to the reception. I asked one of them if I could see their invite, and it was crystal clear that they were evening guests. There was no mention of the service or the breakfast, nor their dietary requirements. I apparently was the only person who was invited, and then uninvited, to the whole. So I sat with them and had some food because I was starving, but they all started leaving to get ready at about 4 p.m. Being a total stranger, I didn't think it best to ask to come with them, but I had never been to this town before, and besides Eric, I didn't know anybody. Since being ejected at 1:30 p.m.-ish, I was expected to just hang until 7:30 p.m. when the reception started. So I left. I feel so unwelcome and unwanted that I just wanted to go home. The evening do will start in about half an hour without me, but I just can't bring myself to attend, knowing that half the guests watched me being asked to leave by the bride herself. I traded in my train ticket, which was a return for tomorrow, and now I'm traveling back alone. I texted Eric to tell him, but he didn't respond. I've been holding back tears since I was ejected 6 hours ago, and I feel completely torn. I don't understand what happened with the invite, whether it was a mistake or whether I was just supposed to know that it was only for Eric. Despite being addressed to both of us, despite asking for both of our dietary requirements, despite explicitly stating we were invited to the whole wedding. Part of me feels like I should have gone to the evening reception too, but I'm soaked through, my hair and makeup look awful, my shoes are unwearable, I am barefoot on a really gross floor right now, and I'm freezing. I look a mess and I feel so stupid. Did I mess up here? I feel like I've just been totally effed over, and I'm really upset that Eric didn't stand up for me or say anything or leave the breakfast with me. Although I think that's less because of malice and more that he's just a bit hopeless when put on the spot. I've never heard of a wedding where you invite a +1 by name, but then they aren't invited to as much of the wedding as the other half of the couple. Nobody else at the wedding had this happen. I don't see how it can be personal since I've never met any of them before. I'm really upset and can't wrap my head around how weird today has been. If this happened to you, what would you do? OP added an edit down at the bottom of this one. It says, edit, so this blew up way more than I expected. Thank you for your words of support. It's really helped, and I've gone from a wobbly wet mess to a cackling harpy with my big glass of wine. You guys don't hold back on your opinions, and I kinda love it. It's now nearly bedtime here. Eric stayed at the party, which is still there. I came home and feel a lot better for knowing how crappy a situation this was. Karma is a B, and when it bites, it's high. So I'm going to go to bed and sleep on it and think about the next steps in the morning. A lot of people think Eric, whoever he is, had never crossed my mind. I was mostly pissed off with the bride and the maid of honor, who made me look like a fool. Eric will be coming home sometime tomorrow, and we're going to talk. I want to hear his piece, because, to be honest, right now, he might just be a dum-dum rather than a full-blown butthole. Either way, no wind-up sudden decisions right now. I'll come back and update as and when anything else happens. Thanks, everyone. Before we get to the update, jumping down to the comment section on this one, we have one from a user called 2 Oranges. It says, "This is the tackiest thing I've ever heard. There's a chance that there was a mix-up or oversight with the invitation, but in that case, the bride should have taken you and Eric aside to apologize and see what could be done to fix it. But the way it was handled was completely unacceptable. I'm so sorry for you. Also, despite your boyfriend being put on the spot, it's been hours now, right? He should have leapt into action by now." Another commenter down below called Kralexi said, "What the F, Eric? What a dumb butt. He stayed and let you leave alone? Oh my gosh." One more commenter from a deleted account said, "Nothing that happened to you was okay. You did nothing wrong. The bride was hellaciously rude to you, both by not inviting you to all the wedding stuff and by kicking you out. But the real star of the show here is your boyfriend. Shout out to him being the biggest turd I've heard about in a while by making you leave by yourself. There's no universe in which he was justified in staying there after you were told to leave. I don't care if he didn't want to make a scene. The only appropriate response was for him to leave with you and the two of you to go somewhere nice for a meal and then go home." Alright, I've got to agree with these commenters. It sounds like OP's boyfriend wasn't even in the wedding party. They were sitting at a table with other guests, so they weren't involved in the wedding. They could very easily just say, "Oh, well that doesn't work for both of us, so we're just both going to head out." I mean, come on, if someone disrespects your partner right in front of you, you step up. And OP's boyfriend missed this one by a mile. Alright, let's get into OP's update. It's titled, I, 24 female, was just uninvited from a wedding that had already started. Am I overreacting? Update. I hadn't expected the big reaction to my first post, and just want to say thank you to everyone who gave advice and was supportive. I was feeling super crappy when I initially posted, and after an hour of drinking wine and reading your comments, I felt a lot more sane and calm. I wanted to clarify a few things that people were confused about or that weren't clear in my first post. I'm in the UK, and our weddings are different from the way weddings are held in the US. Traditionally, there is a ceremony, the wedding breakfast, which is a sit-down 3-course meal. Although it's called breakfast, it is usually in the afternoon, followed by speeches, and then an evening reception, which is like a disco. It's not uncommon for people to invite only relatives and close friends to the ceremony and breakfast, then invite lots of evening guests for the reception. However, it is uncommon to invite somebody to the ceremony and reception, but not the breakfast, as then they are kinda left to entertain themselves somewhere for 6 hours. Having talked to friends and coworkers since last weekend, what happened to me was a serious no-no in terms of etiquette. Me and Eric have been together for nearly a year and a half, we live together, and we have a pretty strong relationship. He had no past romantic connections with the bride, I'll call her Marie, which some people were asking about. They went to school together from the age of 4 to 10, and remained in touch as pen pals and Facebook friends since then. They rarely see each other in person, and the wedding was the first time he would see her in about 2 years. There was zero phone signal at the venue. We noticed this when we arrived for the ceremony, and were a little annoyed as the wedding had a hashtag which we couldn't exactly tweet about with no signal. This is important later. We didn't know this until we arrived at the wedding, but the maid of honor, Helen, was Eric's ex-girlfriend. They were together for 3 years, and she cheated on him and dumped him. They have a lot of bad blood and do not have any contact with each other. Okay, so on to the update. After leaving the ceremony, I got straight on the train and went back to my hometown. I was on the train when I wrote my first post. When I got home, I told my parents everything, and they weren't particularly impressed. And like most of the posters here, they were perplexed that Eric hadn't come with me. My mom gave me a big hug, ran me a bath, and poured me a glass of wine, and I just tried to relax and forget about my day from hell. I still hadn't heard from Eric, but texted him to let him know I was home safe and would see him tomorrow. Eric texted me back around 9 p.m. asking me what I meant by home or the Airbnb that we booked nearby to the venue. I clarified, and he said, okay, I'll see you tomorrow, love you so much. Didn't really know what to make of it since the whole day had just been such a massive F-up, so I finished my wine, watched a Disney movie, and went to bed. The next morning, given I still hadn't really heard from Eric at all, I assumed he would be getting in at about midday. So I got up early and started wrapping Christmas presents. At 8 a.m., I heard a key in the door, and what do you know, it's Eric, still in his creased suit with red eyes looking like death. He wasn't really making sense, so I made him have a shower and warm up, made coffee, and decided to talk once he was looking human again. We sat down together and pieced together his side of the story. Basically, once I had left, Eric was absolutely livid with Marie. He had frozen like a deer in the headlights when she was asking me to go, and was kicking himself that he hadn't done the right thing. About 10 minutes after I left, Marie turned around and said, oh, actually, a few people haven't turned up. Get Vicky to come back, we have space for her now. And Eric tried to call me. Because there was no phone signal anywhere near the venue, he couldn't get through. And Marie pretty much immediately said, oh well, never mind, she didn't want to be here anyway. Which obviously was a pile of crap, and made Eric feel rubbish. The meal was a very formal sit-down affair, so he just kinda grinned and bore it, assuming I would be coming back in the evening. Eric was the only person mentioned in the speeches by Marie's father who wasn't a family member, and apparently it was clear to everyone how disappointed he was that I wasn't there to share it with him. When I texted him at about 6 p.m. to let him know I was going home, he never received it. He was only able to text me at 9 p.m. by hiking down the road for 5 minutes to find a signal. All the while, his ex Helen was being sickly sweet, asking where I was. Why didn't I want to come and enjoy the party? Was I shy? Apparently, with quite the evil glint in her eye, like she had got exactly what she'd wanted. Neither of us knew she was the maid of honor until we got there, and given their bad relationship, Eric was pretty pissed off that Marie had failed to mention she had such a prominent role in the wedding. Whether Helen was behind the seating error, I don't know, but if she was, then Marie was just as bad in enabling it to happen. So Eric stayed at the wedding miserably and went back to the Airbnb afterwards alone. He barely slept, feeling angry at Marie and Helen for messing with us and at himself for not sticking up for me, and left at 4:30 a.m. to get the first train home, hence why he was back at our place so early. He wasn't really apologetic to me at all. He didn't really seem to see how it was crappy for me. He more felt like he had been insulted by the situation and let down by his oldest friend. He is cutting off Marie and doesn't want anything else to do with her. So yeah, that was Eric's take on the whole thing. To be honest, I was pretty pissed that in all of this, he hadn't really considered how I felt, or what it had been like for me getting thrown out of the wedding. While what he had gone through was pretty crummy, he at least had been warm, dry, and well fed. The indignation of your girlfriend being removed from an event you're at isn't really as bad as being the girlfriend, getting soaked in the rain, feeling humiliated, and all the rest. So we talked and I laid out why I wasn't okay with what had happened and why his reaction wasn't okay. He can be a bit of a lemon sometimes, and this feels like one of those times. He didn't step up to the plate. He just let the world wash over him and acted as a bystander. I'm still hurt by his actions, and he still hasn't really apologized properly. I don't know if he understands that he did wrong too, but this isn't a deal breaker for me. It's a heavy straw on the camel's back, but the camel is still standing. We have a really lovely Christmas coming up, and after a really long autumn of working hard, all I want is to go back to the happy place we were before this mess. And honestly, I don't want to think about it. So I know a lot of you guys are going to drag me over hot coals for this one, but we're still together. I'm not going to break up with him over this, but it's a big dark mark on his record. As far as I'm concerned, he needs to get a lot of extra credit to get a pass this year, to use terrible analogy, and I expect him to step up and really try to do better from now on. It's not really an ultimatum, but I'm willing to put this behind us if he can prove to me that he's invested in trying harder in this relationship from now on. If he doesn't, then I won't be sticking around. I love him a lot, but he needs to have my back and be empathetic to what I'm going through. I'm sorry that this wasn't the victorious breakup update that so many of you wanted, but I want a nice happy Christmas together. I'm not ruling it out as an option if things don't improve, but I want to give him another chance to prove this relationship is worth it. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, we have one from a user called Throw the Switch. It says, things to think about. If Marie said only 10 minutes after you left that you could stay, why didn't he come and physically find you after his call didn't go through? If Marie said only 10 minutes after you left that you could stay, why didn't he go and find a signal to call you 5 minutes away after his call didn't go through? Why didn't he try and find a signal to call you, again only 5 minutes away, until 9 p.m.? Another commenter down below called Slinky999 said, being as he hasn't apologized for his part in this fiasco, seemingly doesn't think he did anything wrong, and has not communicated or committed to doing anything differently in the next situation that arises, I don't hold out much hope for him just suddenly changing into a person with a backbone and empathy. I'm sorry to be gloom and doom, but I see nothing here that indicates you aren't in for much of the same if you stay. One more commenter from a deleted account said, this is a bit more than a heavy straw, but more of a 2-ton weight on that relationship camel. Eric screwed that up in every single way possible. He didn't stand up for you, he didn't stand up for himself, and he didn't stand up for your relationship. The fact that he didn't just walk out of that venue with you is disgusting beyond belief. And worst of all, he has the absolute gall to think this is about him. I am happy that you recognize all of the above things, but there is one thing you really need to take to heart. In times of stress and anxiety, a person will show you who they are, how they react. Their reaction to the aftermath is a very detailed look into the inner workings of their mind. Eric spent hours dealing with the aftermath, and it is still all about him, without a single thought for your pain and frustration here. Your analogy of needing tons of extra credit to get that passing grade was terrible, yes, but I think it gives him a bit too much credit. At this point, Eric walked into the final exam, pulled down his pants, and wiped his butt with the final exam. I don't see how any amount of extra credit will wipe that stain off that year-end report. Okay, so I'm focusing on another detail here that I didn't actually see in the comments, and I'd love to know what you people think about this, so if you're on YouTube, comment down below. But he showed up back at their house in the same clothes that he wore to the wedding, but he says that he did go back to the Airbnb and didn't leave for home until 4:30 in the morning. Are you sure about that? Because if I got back to the Airbnb, even if I was a bit inebriated, I would probably get out of that uncomfortable suit. Then we look at the fact that Helen, the ex, seemed very pleased when OP left, made some sly comments about the mix-up, suggesting she might have been in on it, and, well, I think it went exactly the way she wanted it to. Then when he gets home, he doesn't seem to want to talk about it, and doesn't think that there was anything wrong about him sticking around. Yeah, I mean, there's just too many things pointing here towards the bad side of things, like he might have been fishing in another pond, if you know what I mean. But as I said, I would love to know what you all think, so if you're on YouTube, comment down below and let me know what you think Eric was doing and just how much of a butthole Eric is. If you enjoyed daily Reddit stories, I encourage you to follow and add us to your favorites on whichever podcasting platform you enjoy the most. And if you're watching and listening on YouTube, please hit that subscribe button and drop a like on the video. It really helps us out. I thank you for watching and listening. I hope you have a wonderful day, and we'll see you tomorrow.